Welcome to Pandora's Box Chat Show. It is Tuesday night at 8 and tonight we are looking at how do you go about applying for maintenance. With me as always, Felicity Guest.
Hello viewers. Hi Leila.
So tonight we have looked in our previous episodes, we've looked at various issues of financial abuse. We've also had Nina Mensing here last week looking at mediation. And tonight we are looking at the process of applying for maintenance. Where do we start when looking at applying for maintenance?
You go to the nearest magistrate's court closest to you. There are some family court centres in your major cities, but if there isn't a family court, then you go to your nearest magistrate court who all have a maintenance section. So you'd go to the maintenance court, and it's always best to know what to take. And it's your ID document, the child's birth certificate, and the father's contact details, or in the rare occasions, the mother's contact details, so that the court are able to contact the person to summons them to court.
So if you don't bring those documents, they're not going to do anything?
No, they will ask you to come back with the documents.
Okay, and that process, is that a quick process or a lengthy process to get the first paperwork going?
That's pretty quick, because your first meeting is with the maintenance clerk who processes the documentation. So that's pretty quick. It all depends on how many people are at the court on that particular day to see the maintenance clerk. So that's your first protocol, is a maintenance clerk to process the documentation.
So Felicity, how do I know which maintenance court to go to?
The ones closest to where the child lives. There was, however, an amendment to the Act to take into consideration that there's long distances from where you live to where you work, so they made an amendment that you can also go to the nearest court to where you work. Invariably it's in the same town, unless it's like Cape Town or Johannesburg, where there are several courts in one magisterial area. Okay,
so is there a website that I can find, because if I don't know anything about the court system, and very, very often we don't really know this until we find ourselves in a position where we need to look it up. Where do I look it up?
You can go to the Department of Justice's website, and they normally have every single court in the country listed.
So I go to the website and search for the maintenance courts. Correct. And they will give you a list of all the different areas, Belleville, town, etc., etc. And then you choose. Court. And do you need to make an appointment, or you just go in?
No, you just go in. Your first time you appear, you just go in to start the application.
And you take all those documentations with, as we mentioned, and give it to the person. And what happens after that?
Well, they would then, we'll work on the premise that they have the home address and work address of the other parent. They then would summons the other parent, and they notify you of the same date. So you don't leave that day with a date. They will normally notify you by post what date you are to appear in.
So then that date means that you and the other person comes back, and then what?
You would go back and you would see the maintenance officer. Okay. So the maintenance officer is actually qualified. They have a LLB, which is a requirement for a maintenance officer. So they know the law, but they're also trained to a degree in mediation. So when you go and see the maintenance officer, the whole idea is for him to mediate an agreement between both parents. That's what mediation is. So although we heard from Nina, mediation is a process that is facilitated for the two people to come to an agreement. Mm. Where that is slightly different with maintenance is the Maintenance Act has very set requirements in terms of financially supporting your child. So it can't quite be mediation, because then it's not necessarily fair. And also there's a lot of intimidation. So often the maintenance officer has to step in and then apply the law. But okay. If you, for example, if two parents arrive there and they go, the child costs X, we both agree that we will contribute Y and Z, and it's reasonable and covers the child's costs, then there's no need to go into the Maintenance Act and apply to the latter.
And so the spouse would also need to bring in his documentations and proof of income and all of those things.
So there's several scenarios. Okay, we've just said this many times, it's complicated. So the first scenario we'll work with is that both parents agree. Mm-hmm. So then it's a very quick process. They don't necessarily go into your what your earnings are, because they've looked at the cost of the child, and what both parents have offered is reasonable and it covers the cost of the child. They will then make sure that you're both in agreement, and then it's taken to a magistrate who stamps it and makes it court official.
And then you have a court order.
That's correct. So that's the first ideal scenario. That would be great if it worked for everybody, because then you're not required to come back again. So that process could take 3 months.
And then also that amount increases per year.
Yes, there is a provision, and parents normally work on 10%, but they normally enforce CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, which is about 4.5%. Varies between 4.5% and 4.7%.
So in the case we let's say Pandora is not fighting Zeus and both are in agreement that they are going to pay X amount, what would you say should Pandora keep in mind to raise as issues? Or, for example, in my case, when the child turns 18, recently came up, and that became a bit of an obstacle for me. So what are those little things that Pandora should keep in mind if she's the one applying for the maintenance, to make mention of, that might not be automatically assumed?
So the Maintenance Act is actually very clear. When you get to the maintenance court, one of the documentation that you fill in is called a JD 101, and that list outlines all the children's expenses. So you have your direct costs, which would be things like school fees that are directly proportioned to the child. Then you have indirect costs, which are things that the whole family consumes, and that is divided proportionately to the child to establish what their expenses are. So that is pretty clear. So that gets totaled, and then they work it out proportionate to both parents' earnings. So we'll work on the assumption that both parents are earning exactly the same amount. It's just easier for the purpose of this. Then you would both be equally responsible for the child's costs. So if the child's expenses come to 6,000 Rand, then you both contribute to 3,000 Rand. So the Maintenance Act says that it has to be fair and reasonable and affordable, which is, you know, who's going to argue what reasonable is? That's open to interpretation. The Maintenance Act also says that maintenance is an obligation until such time as the child reaches age of majority or self-supporting, whichever is the latter.
Oh.
No, the latter.
Last.
Because, I mean, if you're 18 and you're still going to study, then it would be when they finish studying. So that is written in the Maintenance Act, as well as a yearly increase. That is, so you shouldn't have to fight for that. You shouldn't have to say, make sure this is included.
So Felicity, what is our Pandora story for today?
Pandora's story is a very common one. Pandora went to court and she applied for maintenance. And the directive was served on the father of the child. He didn't arrive in court, so they issued another directive. He still didn't arrive in court. They then summoned him to court. Now, as we've explained before, with the summons, they can be arrested if they don't arrive at court. He didn't arrive at court, so they immediately issued a warrant of arrest. He was arrested, and he actually spent 3 months in jail.
Wow.
She went back to court, and she still doesn't have a maintenance date. So she spent a whole year in court. She's been to the court several times to go, when is my new date? She hasn't been given a new date. She's taken 5 days leave already just to get this far. And she's so despondent. She says, I'm ready to give up. The system has failed me. All that has happened out of this whole process in a year is that the child's father ended up in jail for 3 months. And he didn't go to jail for not paying maintenance. Let's be very clear on that. He went to jail because he failed to arrive at court, and he went to jail for contempt of court, for not appearing in court. So not really
not
maintenance.
Even for the maintenance.
Not for maintenance. They hadn't even got that far yet. So, you know, I understand that he appeared in, it's a different charge, so they don't actually appear in the whole maintenance section. So she's still trying to get to first base to start the maintenance process.
Sure. So we're having our legal expert for today's show. You know Dave Dewar very well. You want to give us a quick background on him?
Yes, Dave has a particular interest in family law. most of his clients come from having difficulties either trying to get maintenance, trying to get arrears, getting divorced, and Rule 53s in the process of getting divorce.
So stay tuned. Right after this, we will be speaking to our legal expert, Dave Dubois, who's going to give us a little bit more insight into how to handle situations such as Pandora's story. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Pandora's Box Chat Show, and we are now joined by Dave Dubois, who is our legal expert for today, going to give us a bit more insight into Pandora's story. Dave, very warm welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi Leila, hi Felicity. Thanks for having me on the show. It's nice to be here. I hope that I can help people with some of the legal issues relating to maintenance.
Dave, when the respondent appeared in court for not appearing in court, why could they not transfer him across to the maintenance section and get the maintenance hearing dealt with, seeing as though he was there and they had been having issues trying to get him there?
Well, Felicity, he would have to be in front of the maintenance court. So unfortunately, in this case, Pandora was not at court, so she wasn't able to manage that process and actually ask for the interim maintenance, which is unfortunate, because it would have to be an order given by the maintenance court when he was present in maintenance court for a maintenance hearing, as opposed to a criminal hearing. They do keep the two separate because they have different consequences.
Dave, why could they not hear his maintenance matter at the same time?
Well, Leila, it depends very much on the court that you're in, because each different magistrates court around the country has got different procedures that they've created. So in some courts, they will combine the two. First they'll run the criminal matter and then they will postpone for the maintenance hearing. And in other courts, what they will do is they will keep the two separate, which I realize will of course be difficult for the person wanting maintenance. So it really does depend on the court where you are as to what procedure they're going to use.
So what recourse does Pandora have?
Leila, it's not an easy question to answer because there isn't a simple answer to that. In this case, Pandora would have to go back, speak to the maintenance officer. I realize it's going to be another day's leave, and I realize that she's going to have to spend time at the court, and unfortunately that's just what's going to be required. So she would need to ask the maintenance officer to issue another subpoena to have him at court. Of course, bearing in mind that they can bring him to court by subpoena using electronic communications, an email address or the like, if he is ducking the proceedings, so that they can have him in court. And in that case, they can actually grant a default order against him in his absence because he's been subpoenaed and he's not there. If she doesn't get any joy or assistance from the maintenance officer, then I would suggest that she approaches the court manager, puts her case before the court manager and asks the court manager to intervene and see if they can move things along a little bit. Unfortunately, there is no short-term solution for the problem. It's not as though she can walk in and walk out with an order which is within a week, because they have to call him to court, they have to give him an opportunity to represent himself. And again, as soon as she gets him to court, obviously she must ask for an interim order, but it's not going to be an easy situation for her because not everyone wants to cooperate with the maintenance system and they want to duck and dive, avoid maintenance. There are systems in place for that, but the systems are very slow in how they play out. It's not something that's going to be resolved within a month or two. As you say, Pandora is a year down the line and she still hasn't had any success out of the system because she is dealing with someone who is fighting against the system. The system will eventually catch him, but it is a very long, very slow process when you're dealing with someone who wants to fight against the system.
And what can other Pandoras do to avoid the kind of delays that has happened in Pandora's case?
Leila, the most important thing is when Pandora gets to court, she must have as much documentation as she can relating to the situation. She must have all of it nicely set out, easy to read, so with a summary on top of income and expenses, so that the maintenance officer can work through it quickly, understanding that they've got 20, 30, 50, 60 people, even more, hanging around looking for help from the court every single day. So the easier you make their lives, the easier it is for them to help you. If you have a copy of his payslip or copies of his bank statement, of course you've got to have these legally, without having taken them improperly, then you can put that in front of the court, which will also help the court to grant you an interim maintenance order, because you can show that he can actually afford that maintenance based on payslip or copies of bank statements, so that they can see what he's earning, that he is employed, so that you can get an answer on it. But that would be my suggestion as to how to try and avoid the difficulties. Go as much information as you can, where he lives, where he stays, email addresses, proof of his income, proof of your income, your expenses, what maintenance is required. The better you're prepared, the easier the system is to work with.
When applying for maintenance, is there any advice you have for our Pandoras to make sure that the process goes as smoothly and as quickly as possible?
Leila, again, I need to emphasize, be prepared. Okay? The other thing that I'm going to add to that is that you must remember that the maintenance officers have a very difficult job. Be polite, be nice to them, respect what they're doing, and you will find that if you treat them well, that they're going to work with you as opposed to giving you a hard time. If you go in there and you're rude and belligerent and give them a hard time, well, you're going to get exactly the same back from them. They're also people. They also go home at the end of the day to their families after having done a long, demanding day's work. So be nice to them, treat them well. I would also suggest that you treat the occasion of the court with respect. Go to court dressed well. Don't go in jeans and a t-shirt. Dress up. Treat it with respect. Show the maintenance officer and the magistrate respect in terms of what they're doing and their roles, and you will get a far better reception, and you will make your whole life a lot easier within that system.
Dave, is it necessary to have legal representation when applying for maintenance for the first time?
It's not necessary to have any legal representation with you when you go to court, and of course if you can't afford it, rather save your money for when you are actually at court for the hearing. That being said, what you will find though is if you do go to court with legal representation, that the process moves a little bit smoother, because your legal representative, if they don't know the maintenance officer already, they will walk in there and they have an understanding of what's needed, what the maintenance officer is looking for, and the maintenance officer very often will respond better to them than a member of the public, because they don't have to explain the process, what has to be done, how it has to be done. Your legal representative will walk in and say, here are the documents you're looking for, let's get on with it, this is what we need, this is where you'll find them, and it will move a lot smoother.
And maybe just a little bit of advice from your side.
Leila, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting session, and I realise that there are a lot of people battling with maintenance. If for those people who can't afford an attorney or legal representative, what I would suggest, and I think this is also very important and applies to everyone, is that they take the time to read the Maintenance Court Act. There's a lot of information on the internet relating to it, some of which will help you, some of which won't help you, but go read the Act itself, and then go and read the amendment, which is dated for 2015 but only came into effect last year, because it gives the Act a lot more teeth. So if you go into court knowing your rights, you can fight for those rights a lot easier, because, well, a lot more effectively, let me phrase it that way, because you know what it is that you can get from the court.
Dave, thank you so much for being with us this evening and giving us this insightful information. We certainly hope to welcome you back next time. Have a good evening.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to being back on the show.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, Felicity, that certainly has shed quite a bit of light on Pandora's story. I certainly hope that that advice is going to help other Pandoras going through the application of the maintenance process to make it just a little bit smoother, because initially it might feel like you're making progress, and then sometimes you end up in front of this big brick wall, and then it takes a year, 2, 3, 4, 11 and 20 later, like in your case.
Yes.
But that is something that we are going to touch on in another episode. That is it for this evening. I hope that you've learned something and that you found the information valuable. Do remember to subscribe, like and share. Remember, the more subscribers we have, the bigger the difference that we can make. So please do subscribe to our channel if you have not done so yet. Share with your friends and make sure that we make this a powerful platform where we can make a difference that counts, not just for us, but for you and everybody else. Have a wonderful evening further. Good night.
Good night.